seconds to go. Hits half court against Rubio. Larkin going slowly with the right-hand dribble. Now attacks Rubio. Over the shoulder pass. Ojale swings out to Jaylen Brown. 3 in the air for the game. Got it! He got it! Jaylen Brown goes crashing to the ground as the Celtics get a 3 with 1/10 of a second remaining. Timeout remaining. Ball in safely to Rozier. Clock rolling. 9 seconds to go in game 1. Rozier out of the right side. Now the motion starts away from the ball. Rozier switches to the right hand. Steps back. Good look at the 3. Got it! Terry Rozier giveth. And then Terry Rozier, they just have taken game 1 away from the Milwaukee Bucks.
Somebody got some on the bottom of his shoes, and it's
no timeouts. Celtics down 1. They have never led. Rozier on the inbound. Bounce pass. Horford catches. 5 seconds to go. Horford bulls his way in, forces it up and in. The Celtics have the lead. No timeouts for Houston. 3.7 to go.
Man, give me some Cheetos, somebody. I need something to eat.
This place will go berserk. Harden knocks down Smart again and turns the ball over.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the OffBeat Sports Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe us. Today we're joined by the voice of the Boston Celtics, Grande. Thanks so much for talking with us today.
My pleasure. You guys just making do without school. I mean, that was my dream as a kid. Like, oh, school's over, March 11th. But here you guys are putting in work, doing extra stuff. I would have been goofing off watching games and stuff.
So how's quarantine been going for you?
Well, I've become a runner since they shut the gyms down. And that, I mean, it'd be bad enough when I was your age, running 9-10 miles every day. To do it at my age has not been terribly enjoyable, but we're all making do, right? I mean, everyone's healthy. You know, on my side, and my son and my new wife, and everything's good. And it looks like we're getting back to work, you know, in another 6 weeks or so. And that's going to be weird and different, but so is all of this for everybody. So we're going to make the best of it.
So the first question I have for you is something that's difficult to talk about, but when the Kobe Bryant situation happened, you had probably the most memorable quote that I've ever heard about any situation with any tragic thing ever. And that was, you know, Kobe Bryant has broken our hearts in Boston multiple times, but, you know, he did it again. And what were you thinking when you said that?
I was thinking that I was taking my son. I wasn't doing that game. That was a game occasionally because of time with my son. I've been skipping some games the last couple of years because I get a limited amount of time with him, and that was one of the games I wasn't doing. So I had to go into the side. It turns out to be sort of a preview of what's going to happen. I had to go into the studio, which is probably where we'll be doing the game starting next month. And I had my son with me, and he was asking me about Kobe. I'm trying to explain to him the significance of what had just happened. And what popped into my head was he had broken Celtic hearts so many times that it just wasn't – once he retired, it was impossible that he would ever do it again. And I think we were all just destroyed that day. And the unfairness of it, and the fact that, you know, when it comes to Kobe, what made it – listen, anybody that age losing their life, any family man, any father, obviously. But it was that I've talked about Jaylen Brown a lot for obvious reasons the last couple of weeks. What Kobe was going to contribute in the second half of his life was going to be extraordinary. My wife did an interview with him just months before he died, talking about the films that he was going to direct, the youth sports, the youth basketball. It was, you know, he was just scratching the surface as a person. His legacy basketball-wise is set forever. But that's why it was just devastating. Remember, this is a guy, and we're going to find out in a couple of years, right? When LeBron plays his last game in Boston, that's going to be an amazing sight when the fans finally let go of the hatred, which is really just misplaced fear. That's all that is. And respect for LeBron. It's going to be an amazing thing on that last night. But this is a guy, even in the middle of his career, I'd remind everybody, in 2007, the entire Garden was chanting MVP at this guy when the Celtics were in the middle of that losing streak. And, you know, Kobe was Kobe. So there was so much respect for him as a player that I think I was just my job, right, which is an impossible one, is to put a voice and words to what most of us are thinking in that moment, and that's what occurred to me on the ride into the station.
I can tell you, my stepfather isn't very like open about things. He's not very active on anything as far as social media, but he made sure to actually go out and like post your quote, and he talks to me about it all the time and how significant it is to him. So it definitely hit home what you said. So
Yeah, that day was devastating. I was just like, I was thinking back. I was going through like my phone. I had like videos from. I was able to go to his last game in Boston, and I just have videos of his last free throws. And I was just at that point, I was just like, "Whew, he's finally out of the league and out of Boston's problems." But then when he died, I was just like, that's way bigger than just Boston versus LA. That's devastating in the basketball world as a basketball player myself, and it's just like you even though you don't want to like him as a basketball player because he's a rival, but you got to respect his game and like you have to like kind of idolize his mentality, and I just not having that like in the world is just disappointing.
And something else that people didn't know, Kobe Bryant loved Boston. He loved coming here. He loved the rivalry because of the history of it. He loved playing in it. He loved coming to the city, and he adored the North End because of his Italian upbringing. And it was just, he loved this city, and he fed on it, and not all players do, and not all players are as that locked into it. But yeah, no question.
So from or kind of changing gears from that, do you have a favorite game from your career that you're able to call?
There are a few answers to that. The one that I sort of pick as a generational game in which I felt, I sort of lived up to it. And it was, you have throughout the course of your career from the time you're your age, there are moments, there are sort of milestones you feel like, okay, I'm finally good at this. I'm finally okay at this. I'm finally okay at this. From an NBA standpoint, the Paul Pierce, LeBron James Game 7 in 2008. I just remember, it was a time in my life I wasn't a dad yet. I wasn't married at that point. It was that team was my life at that particular time. And I just remember being so locked in throughout that spring. I was convinced, if you guys are, hardcore, you'll remember there was a game early in the year. The Celtics actually lost to Detroit. It was the third. They only lost 3 games of the first 32. They lost the game to Detroit, and they had not played well that night. The Pistons played very well. And the Pistons, the defending champions in the East and the team to beat, had barely gotten by. And it was that night I was convinced that they're going to win. This team is going to win. So the entire year was 2 things for me. It was this team is going to win the championship, and there was also the Kevin Garnett angle, having been with him in Minnesota, having been the one who was talking a lot about it during the summer and coming across sort of a surprising non-understanding of just what Kevin Garnett, the player, was when, it's a forgotten part of history, which I make sure is not forgotten because I bring it up all the time. There was a poll in the Boston Herald when the rumor started in June of 2007. Would you trade Al Jefferson for Kevin Garnett? And 81% of the people said no. Because we had done so. Al was great. He was rising, and people just didn't quite understand what Kevin Garnett was. So the year for me was, I think they're going to win. I'm going to document that along the way, how I see it playing out, which it obviously did. And also the Kevin Garnett thing which was a little element of told you so as that year was going on when he, had what should have been an MVP year.
what was it like covering KG from market to market? Because you were with him in Minnesota early on his career. And then, for the first few years there in Minnesota, and he's on a smaller market. That team can't really get itself off the ground. They didn't have as much success. It was probably a lot different to cover that kind of a team. And then you come here and you watch him play on the Celtics team that's running teams over and just, like you said, you saw them and you're like, this team can win. Like, this team's going to win. What was it like covering him from market to market and just, you know what I mean?
Well, remember, I was new. When I went to Minnesota, not only am I 27, 28 years old, but basketball was my clear-cut number 4 sport. I'm not sure which of the other 3, you could divide them any way you wanted, but basketball was my number 4. This was not the life plan to be, which is now going to be the first line of my, when I'm dead and gone, they'll say longtime voice of the Celtics. That was not the plan, especially the Celtics, since I grew up in New York and was not a Celtic fan. But it's funny how life works. It was a success story then because Minnesota was, because of Garnett, they were bursting onto the national scene. The team didn't have the ultimate playoff success it didn't because they were living in 1999, 2000, 2001 in the Western Conference of Kobe and Shaq, Rasheed Wallace in Portland, Chris Webber and Jason Williams and that team in Sacramento. And it was just a shark tank in the Western Conference. So it was impossible for them to break through until 2004 when they eventually did. But it was obvious to me he's just different. He's a different guy, was from the start. I think during that summer of 2007 when I was banging the drum a little bit, which is not really my job, but I just felt people weren't understanding what could happen and what eventually obviously did happen. He is as unique an individual as he is a player. If you're making a team of 12, 15 greatest players to ever play, he might not make that team, but he's getting a pretty hard look at one of those last spots because he could do so many things. And, I have a lot of the stuff fresh in my head because obviously at some point when fans are allowed back in next year and we return to some level of normalcy, there's going to be a Kevin Garnett night at the Garden. And the night before we played the Lakers the day before the Kobe service out there in LA. So everybody was there at that game, including Garnett. And Garnett was with Rondo on the court. And I'm not a big, go down and schmooze, whatever, but I saw Garnett. And I went down to see him exchange, high fives and hugs and how you doing? How's the family? And I said, listen, I made Paul Pierce cry on his night with what I wrote. My job is to make you cry when number 5 goes up next year. So I'm pretty excited about it. I have an open mind about virtually every topic that you can imagine. The reason I've never hosted a sports talk show is because I tend to not be, this is the right thing no matter what you say and whatever, and I tend to be open-minded and think through things. But there's one issue on which I will not have any conversation, and that is, you think Kevin Garnett's number should retire? It's a no-brainer that his number should retire.
When that was a question, it was like, really? It was like, without him, you don't really – you know what kind of drought you'd be in now? You know the talks that would be happening if you don't have that championship right now?
And if you don't put his number up, you got to take a bunch of them down, including my partners, by the way. But that, the real interesting question is who's next?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely not Kyrie's though, so that's good.
Yeah, it won't be that one. Commercial or not.
What's your relationship like with Cedric Maxwell?
Who's that again? If I didn't have a son who was 8, who was my best man at my wedding last year, it would have been Max. He's the reason. He's my brother, obviously, in every possible way. He's the reason largely that I came. I had a pretty good thing going to Minnesota. It is somewhat unusual for someone to leave television to go to radio. So I was not overly excited about the possibility at the time, but I remember the tide turning when Max called my house in Minnesota that summer. And I thought this could be something. And I think the things that make us different, our different backgrounds, come across on the air. I think we've taken it to a level of it's sort of a show, the differences between us that we kind of exaggerate a little bit. But at the end of the day, any successful pairing, any successful television show, any long range thing that lasts, it's because the characters on that show. And this is what I always say about Inside the NBA. Those guys, Kenny and Shaq and Charles, they could fight all night for 3 hours. The reason that show is the gold standard and the best of its kind ever is because at the end of the day, all those guys really love each other.
That was awesome. But what were your thoughts on Kyrie's brief stint and exit with the Celtics?
It was an interesting couple of years, and my opinion didn't change much as it was going on, which created an interesting dynamic for me. It created the dynamic where people thought during that second year, I was probably a little bit too hard on him. And then after February 1st, after Talk to Me in July, after everything went south, it became you're being too easy on him, when my opinion never really changed. He is an extraordinary talent. He's a fascinating individual. But there is I think there's a chip missing when it comes to leadership, when it comes to self-awareness, that I don't think he really grasped. And I use this when he was here, when he was on the team, when I was asked this question, I would offer the following quote, which is, what do you call a leader with no followers? He's just a guy out for a walk. And that's really what it was, that he had been in an environment. This oversimplified version is, if you have a locker room with LeBron James in it or Kevin Garnett in it, you can have the flakish, earth is flat, what does government mean to you, uber talented guy at the other end of the locker room, and at the end of the day, it's going to be fine. He was the guy in the room. And the other presence, you had guys that didn't have the cachet of superstardom, Marcus Smart, Marcus Morris.
Yeah, you had Al Horford,
and you had Al, but Al and Brad Stevens are two guys who are not going to be domineering. They're going to be, hey, let everybody do their thing. And listen, it was Al's dream, and Al was a great Celtic. It was Al's dream when Kyrie got here, because what they always said about Billy Joel, his dream was to play backup in somebody else's band. Al could just come, have great games, be a great Celtic, be an all-star, and all the microphones were in Kyrie's face after the game. It was his dream scenario. But, I mean, if there was ever anybody destined to be misunderstood, it was Kyrie Irving. And he, I think to this day, doesn't really understand what he did on February 1st. I mean, his mistake wasn't going back on his word. His mistake was giving his word in the first place.
Definitely. When he said that, when he goes, I'll definitely, if you guys will have me back, it's like, whoa. It's like the trade was worth it in everyone's mind. Because personally, I love Isaiah Thomas. Like, I was younger when Paul Pierce was here. We're all seniors in high school. So in his prime years, we weren't 18 years old. We weren't able to really watch and understand until we were a little bit older. But Isaiah, you weren't watching the live games at 6 years old.
Yeah.
But for Isaiah, it was like he came out of nowhere. He was an upcoming story. He was the last pick in the draft. He was too small. He didn't have the tools to play, and he was just amazing. So when he was traded, it was like, really, even though, it was definitely not a good scenario, even if he stayed because of his injury and whatever he wanted for money, it wouldn't have worked out. But it was crazy to see how Kyrie said, I'm definitely going to stay. And then to go back on that, like, I see what you're saying. Because if he had just not said it, it would have been fine, go, whatever, we don't care, go.
Going home, going back to New York. Yeah, he didn't have to do it. It was last year was a strange team. And there are lessons about chemistry and just piling up star players and piling up talent that I use the example. Remember last year they came out, it was constantly during the NCAA tournament, and you guys will remember this because you're watching all these games. They kept pushing that orange vanilla Coke, right? It was on every commercial all the time, orange vanilla Coke. Well, you know what? That's what I called last year's team, because orange is great, vanilla is great, Coke is great. But all three together didn't really work, and that's what last year's team, it just didn't fit together.
Honestly, I didn't really want him to come back, but it's
I don't think anyone was really upset that he went back.
This is a true story, so you can't see it out the window. I live about a mile from the Garden, so I walk to and from. After Game 4 against Milwaukee, which he was terrible, and the Celtics lost, and we're down 3-1, and the season obviously is going to end. They have the cars lined up at Leverett Circle because there's traffic coming out of the game, and I'm walking back home my mile like I always do, and people were so mad at Kyrie, they were mad at me. They were like screaming, like, get him out of here, Grande, get him out of here. So the degree to which it turned, and that's what happened, because you burn a Celtic fan you're going to pay for it. They gave you their love. They gave you their unconditional love. And last year, the saddest thing about last year was that I've never seen the fans in 19 years here. I've never seen fans more excited about a team than they were the 18-19 team at the start of the year. And they just did not live up to the fans' love and their expectations of what a Celtics team.
Because you had all those aspirations. Because you had all the talent back. You had Jason Tatum coming off that year, and you had Jaylen Brown coming off that year without Kyrie, where they blossomed, and they were like, you're like, whoa, like they can carry the weight. So. And
it wasn't just wins and losses; it was the joylessness of a lot of it. And it's funny because what you forget about that team, the middle portion, there's like if you divide the season into three, I knew they'd struggle at the start because Gordon's not Gordon yet. He's trying to work his way back. Everybody's trying to find their role again, and the schedule was very tough. So the 10-10 start didn't surprise me last year. And what everybody forgets is that the middle third of the season, they were the best team in the league. They led the league at scoring differential. They had the best record. They were like 25-9. But it's funny, if you think about that time, you'll think back to Marcus Morris and Jaylen Brown yelling at each other, Kyrie kind of snap, and that's in the middle of them playing well. So it just was never a team, as much as the fans wanted to love it, it didn't fit. And the real answer with Kyrie is, and maybe this hits home and maybe it doesn't, but there's always that, oh my God, that beautiful girl. Look at that girl over there. Oh my God, she's amazing. And then all of a sudden, she's yours. And you heard some stories. You might have heard some things, some rumors, some whatever that maybe it's not quite. But what do we all say? That won't happen to me. It won't happen here. It won't happen. But everything everyone in Cleveland said he was. And by the way, that's not a knock on Kyrie. I think it's all of our expectations. We wanted Kyrie to be a different person than he was, and he wasn't. This is the guy that left. He didn't want to play with LeBron James. He did not want to play with LeBron James.
Yeah, and I mean, I think since everyone was really happy when we got him, and then he promised he would stay, I don't think anyone really cared that after he left because he caused all those problems that you were talking about. And yeah, I agree. The team didn't perform like they should have.
So I'm assuming you watched The Last Dance. And with that documentary, I'm curious to see if it had any impact, or just curious to hear in general, what is your Mount Rushmore of all-time players?
That's a landmine, right? Like you don't want to go down that road because you just leave guys out.
Yeah.
I think obviously the question is Jordan and LeBron. And the beauty of it is, how can you answer that when LeBron's body of work is not yet completed? I mean, at the end of the day, I would say since 2006, I really felt that when it's all said and done, LeBron is going to be the best there ever was. Now, whether he eclipses Michael in people's eyes, that's a view of generations. It's really interesting to talk to you guys about it because mostly I'm talking to people much older with their view and their romanticism about Jordan. There's one generation romanticized about Bird and Magic. Older guys have been around forever. They'll talk about Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain, whatever, and you can't genuinely compare them. I've got to argue with Tommy Heinsohn about Bill. Listen, Bill Russell won no one will ever top that, right? Winning all the championships and whatever. There's a million ways to insert different guys into the conversation, but the LeBron one is going to be fascinating because he's 35 years old and obviously in great shape, especially when last year he basically got to take the year off. So we don't know what's left for him and can he win more championships? And I think it was obviously captivating to see it. I don't know if it's going to set the bar for the way sort of documentary is done now where the subject gets the last word as to the stuff that was. And you know what? It was great. That's not a knock on it. It was great television. But that's important to remember, too, that, listen, if I were doing a documentary about me, I'd love to put that in there, too. I get the last word. It's great. And it was tremendous television. And for those that sort of lived through it, it's funny because Max and I, one of our great arguments was about Jordan coming back with Washington, which, again, you guys are too young to remember. But I came into the league in 1998 when Jordan left. So when he came back with Washington, I was excited about it because I got to do Michael Jordan games. And I didn't care that he was not the best player anymore, but he was still a very good player. So that, to me, that's the sort of line of demarcation to me. Those 90s, the people that romanticize about the 90s, I wasn't in the league then. And probably as into everything as I was probably more – I was watching the NHL more in the 90s and doing a lot of college hockey and whatever because I assumed that was going to be my future. But I loved – I thought it was an extraordinary piece of work. And thank God they aired it when – because we all needed it. We all needed something to watch. I am fascinating to see not just LeBron, but how it affects a lot of the guys in the league now as it does something that I've always tried to do, which is place things in real time in historical context. But I wonder how many players start thinking that way a little bit more than they do, than the here and now. Because LeBron will be one, but I wonder about other guys thinking about, what their last dance is going to look like in 10 years or 15 years.
Mm-hmm. Who was your pick to win the NBA Finals this year?
I tend to – I'll say this. Every team that has dominated the regular season the way the Bucks have dominated it this year has won the NBA championship. The lone exception, even there's obviously Golden State, and that took LeBron James coming from 3-1 down to do it. But they look like a team that could win. Obviously, everything is who's going to win in the bubble is a completely different question. And people about, well, do you think there's an asterisk? And the answer is, hell yeah, there's an asterisk. It's the biggest asterisk season in the history of asterisk seasons, but it beats the living heck out of the alternative, which was not playing.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for it. I'm fascinated to see it, where everything changes and all these teams that aren't going to have home court advantage now that would have had it. All this, the Celtics we're going to furiously chase Toronto down the stretch for home court in the second round. Right now, there is no home court. The Clippers, Doc was never going to chase that anyway, so now they don't care about it anymore. Are the Clippers end up playing the Lakers in the second round, or is that not until the conference finals? There's all these different questions, and obviously the biggest one of all. Does LeBron, does Giannis, does Kawhi, does Jason Tatum, who's going to test positive, right, inside the bubble and not be able to play? So I think we have to sit back and enjoy it for what it is. And I think cross our fingers and hope we can have, because you don't know, based on when we're talking here on June 12th, and things have started to get a little more pessimistic again, because obviously we opened everything too early. Let's hope we can have a reasonable season next year with some or all the fans eventually back and focus on that. And let's have fun with this bubble tournament, because at the end of the day, if I told you three guys that Kawhi Leonard and Jason Tatum and Paul George and Kemba Walker were about to play in an open gym somewhere, how many miles would you walk to see it? So I think there's going to be a huge appetite for it, and I'm excited to see it. But picking it, I'll say this. The Celtics were probably the team least affected by home road this year, particularly in the last month. The Celtics haven't won a home game in the last month before the season stopped. So I think teams like the Celtics that are not dependent on one player are probably teams you might look at in our little dome, or Orlando Dome, Disney World.
If it happens, based on the reports today.
Right. And as we talked today, obviously the players, I think I was a little surprised they weren't as consulted as I thought they were. No one's going to – and that's another thing. Are there going to be players that say, I don't want to play? Because that's going to be their option. You don't have to play. You only have to play if you want. And then are you letting your team down? So tough call. I know. I think all of us, people ask me, what's it going to be like doing it without fans? What's it going to be like doing it in a studio? Nothing's going to be normal. Nothing's going to be the way it's supposed to be, but it's our job to
make it as normal as
give you guys the best show we can give you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be – I think you're right. It's going to have an asterisk. I think it's going to be like a whole different game. But it's interesting because especially if one of the team's star players, like especially guys like Giannis or LeBron, if they were to test positive, it's a huge asterisk. It's so much different.
I know Cross has one question for you, but I have to ask you this. What is it, as a broadcaster, what do you think about the fake fans thing? Because Joe Buck has talked about, even though he's more of on television, they're going to pump in the fake fan noise to the headset for you guys. But as a fan, it's more of like, this is a once in a lifetime experience where you would hear the game just in its purest form with no fans. What do you think about that? Like, what do you for you?
I have a unique perspective on it because one of the things we started to do, and we ended up stopping after a few weeks, but we did computer simulations of the rest of the games, and Max and I were calling them. And the guys in production were trying to add crowd noise to the background, and that's really hard to do. It's hard to make it sound right. So to me, it's just a dangerous game. The crowd, I've compared it. A question I get a lot is, what's it going to be like calling a game with no fans? It's singing a cappella is what it is. I don't have the music behind me. So it's going to be dependent on us to really convey everything because you're often pausing for the crowd. You're letting the crowd be part of the sound. So you got to get used to it. I've tried to watch UFC and WWE and the entities that have gone forward here without crowd noise. It's going to be tough. But you know what? Again, I think we have to swallow what this is. And this is going to be like something we've never seen or heard before, and hopefully never again. But you know what? There aren't going to be fans, so let's not worry about it. I mean, I like, again, one of the things that some of these places are doing, they're having like some extra people, like 30 or 40 people inside the building, and they're cheering and making some noise and whatever. It doesn't matter to me either way, but it's a dangerous game, pumping in the crowd noise, because the odds of making it match are not good.
All right, so my thing is, so I'm thinking about Celtics versus Bucks matchup. And in the playoffs, it usually goes down to like a 7 or 8 man rotation, and I think the Celtics first 6 is arguably the best in the league, and I think that's going to hold a huge impact coming into this. So and we were talking with Joe Murray the other day, and he was saying how he doesn't think that the Celtics bench is enough to help. But I'm thinking like the bench doesn't have as much of an impact in the playoffs as it did during the regular season. So I'm not as concerned. I think actually the Celtics will increase their play. What do you think about the Celtics matchups against like other teams like the Bucks?
No, I think that's a good analysis, because I think, again, given the bubble, given the testing positive, it's the teams that have multiple guys. And if you're starting with the theory that the Celtics have the best 1 through 6 in the league, that's a pretty good way to go into a tournament like this. The question obviously is it's not so much Giannis. Giannis is going to do what Giannis does. Is Middleton, you're going to get a star performance from Middleton. Go back to the last dance. When did the Bulls go from being a contender to a championship team? Was when Scottie Pippen became an all-star too. And Chris Middleton's had one of the great shooting years of all time. And, it's not a fluke what they did in the regular season. And that's where we were. Obviously, I was really looking forward to that game the next night. That's where we were when everything got shut down, to see a late season game with Milwaukee. But it's hard. We can do as much hardcore X's and O's analysis. The amount of things that we don't know right now about who's going to be healthy, who is in shape, and who wasn't coming back. Listen, did Joel Embiid use this time to get healthy and dedicate himself to being the most in shape, dominant star athlete of all time? Or was he Joel Embiid, during this time off, and it's going to be tough for him to get back in shape? We don't know anything because the guys have been away. Rumors will come out and we'll hear more. But I get a kick out of the Vegas odds and stuff like that. I'm like, what on earth are you basing this on? Well, we've never seen anything remotely like it. I mean, the Grizzlies could win. Who knows? It's going to be wild.
Yeah, I agree with that point about the bench. Like, I do really like the Celtics top 6, especially the bottom of that. But I might say the Lakers are a little bit better. But I still do think that the
Celtics top 6 is 1 through 6 is just so good.
I agree. I do like the Celtics top 6 though. I think they have a good shot.
I'll say the Celtics make the most compelling final. I'm not saying the Celtics should get there, but the most compelling finals would be the Celtics against the Lakers or Clippers.
They'll get
Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum have both dunked on LeBron. I'm not worried about it.
Those 2 games, they're probably the best 2 games the Celtics were in this year. Like instant class. Those 2 games that the Clippers were.
Oh my God, the overtime games with the Clippers were amazing. Like watching them or listening to them, you know what I mean? It's just back and forth. It's crazy.
These games are on TV too. I just assumed I was the only.
I mean, as much as we love hearing your voice, we do sometimes have to turn on the TV and watch it.
Shut up, man. We only listen.
I've had 18, 19 years now of people basically almost offering apologies when it's like they always have an excuse. I got stuck in the car, so I heard you do the game. My TV cable went out, so I heard you. I'm like, we do this every night.
No, you can just mute the TV and turn on the radio.
It's hard, and that's the old school way to do it. Nowadays, as you guys know, because you've grown up in this world, in the olden days, Johnny Most days, way before my time, let alone yours, there was basically just one signal. But now people are getting the games delivered to them TV-wise. You could be watching it on your laptop. You could be watching it through different cable systems, whatever. So it's very difficult. It takes a lot – we appreciate the people that do it, but it takes a lot of effort to match up the audio.
All right. Well, with that just about wraps up this episode of the OffBeat Sports Podcast. Thanks so much for talking with us. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much, Sean.
Hey, no worries, guys. Congratulations on graduation. I'm sorry it wasn't what it was supposed to be. I think the funniest part of this whole thing is when they told all of us old people, send a message to all the high schoolers who are like, you guys could possibly care. But we have like, who cares what old people think about you? I mean, graduation's graduation. I'm like, what do you care what we think? My goodness.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks so much, Sean. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to watch our other videos.
Be sure to like and subscribe.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram at offbeat_sports.